Hello and welcome to my talk, Enabling Cross-Border Understanding and Cultural Competence in the EFL Classroom by Ouma. As a multicultural and multilingual person, the question of how do we experience and learn about culture has been one that has fascinated me, and it has fueled my research and my career thus far. The talk I'm going to give today stems from a research that was born through my MA dissertation. So in my MA research, Attaining the Unattainable, What It Means to Be Culturally Competent, I examined how people gain cultural competency. I explored how people gain cultural knowledge and understanding and effective ways of developing cultural competency. My research found multiple tools and skills required for an individual to be considered culturally competent. And this led me to my current research. And through my research in my MA, I was able to create an elective syllabus at my current university in which I could explore how, as educators, we could help students gain cultural competency within the classroom. So the research methods for this study was that my data was collected in an elective class at a Japanese university. The participants were 2nd to 4th grade university students aging between 19 and 23. The data was collected over several academic years, but today I'm just going to show you very small portions of the data and mainly talk about the overall points of my research. And the data was collected using video recordings in the classroom, field notes, as well as homework assignments and the students' own reflections at the end of the course. I'll be using data from several classrooms, both from face-to-face classrooms of 2018 and 2019, as well as the online classrooms of 2020 and 2021. So the elective syllabus that I created to find out if we could teach cultural competency in the classroom consisted of what I will show you now. So this is the first semester of the course. So as you can see, the course mainly focuses on the theme of what is culture. To initiate students into this course, I wanted them to think about what they know of culture, how they view it, and kind of go from there and question that and start to analyze their own culture as well as other cultures. The beginning of the course mainly focuses on a very generic and a very broad understanding of culture. And we use themes like the cultural iceberg to think about different points of culture, both seen and unseen. This becomes very useful later on in the course, where students can start matching up parts of culture that are seen and unseen with their own experiences and start to analyze it in more detail. So the beginning of the course is quite simple, as I've mentioned. Towards week 3 and 4, students start to kind of explore their own culture. Within this classroom, it was mainly Japanese students, but there were a few international students from places like China, Thailand, as well as a student from Senegal. So it was interesting to see the different cultural backgrounds and how they could explore those cultures. So week 3 and 4, students start to think about the kind of visible culture that they see in their own countries. And as we get closer to week 5 and 6, students start to now compare it with other cultures. And this was great to see within the classroom where students from different cultures could think about what similarities were within those different cultures, as well as the differences. And as we moved on to weeks 6, 7, and 8, this was the point where students started to really analyze cultures and started to compare cultures, and not only seen culture. Of course, with Japanese culture, that would be things like food, sushi, tempura, those kinds of things, cultural clothing, kimonos, etc., as well as, media, J-pop, anime, and so on. So students could start really comparing those things, and as well as going deeper into the unseen parts of the iceberg, thinking about concepts of Japanese-ness and concepts such as politeness and relationships and indirectness, and all of these things that can link as well as kind of divide and differentiate cultures. So we started getting more into the theory of kind of cultural theories and those kinds of topics. So it got more in depth as the class progressed. In week 8, this is the kind of assessment week that we have in the university. And at this point, students got a chance to kind of condense all of the information they've studied so far into a short paper that they would write. So students would choose a culture that we discussed and found interesting within the classroom, and they would compare this culture to their own. Most of the students being Japanese, most of them compared Japanese culture to a culture of their choice. And they could start to analyze and think about the similarities and differences in how cultures are shown and how they're exhibited, both visually and through unseen cultural aspects. As we get further into the end of the semester, students started to think more about their own experience rather than culture as a broader concept. So during week 8, from week 8 to week 15, this was the time when we did a short project with the students. So students would write down their own past experience as well as ongoing cultural experiences they'd had. And during the classroom, we would analyze those experiences, think about whether those experiences were positive, negative, neutral, and how the concepts we'd learned about, for example, indirectness, politeness, relationship theories, all of those things affected their interactions. And the next step was to think about how they could improve their intercultural interactions in the future. So the entire purpose of this course was to help students think about their own cultural experiences and moving forward, how they could incorporate these skills and all this knowledge to better have successful cultural interactions in the future. And all of this culminated in week 15 with a final group discussion where we would talk about everything that we had discussed, including this, especially the students' interactions with different cultures and different people, and put that all together. And the aim of the course was by the end of the first semester, students kind of started to gain small insights into being a little bit more culturally competent. And I will show you how that was done. So the classroom dynamic, as I've mentioned briefly, is I adopted a flipped classroom and loosely. So it was mainly very, very student-centered. I would give brief information during the beginning of the course to help scaffold the students into the concepts of culture and the things that we would be discussing later on. However, the course was very much student-centered. So the course was led by where the students wanted to go and the kinds of topics and the kinds of discussions that came up naturally. Students were encouraged to share their opinions and feelings about various topics, and I was very much adamant that this was a free space and a safe space for students to share their topic, share their opinions, share their feelings with no right or wrong answers. And lastly, the class focused on discussion and student-led learning. So there weren't any tests, there weren't any kind of right and wrong answers. It was very much a free classroom for students to engage with each other. And through that engagement, that is how they built their cultural competencies. So round tables were the form that I used for the discussions throughout the course. After each topic, we would sit around in the classroom and discuss whatever the opinions came up, whatever questions came up, whatever topics came up. With the final projects, we spent most of the final weeks of the class doing these round tables. So students would have kept diaries over the week with either past experiences that they remembered, current ongoing experiences, as several of the students had either fieldwork classes where they engaged with intercultural people from different backgrounds, people from different countries, etc., or also media. So students who had little to no interaction with other cultures could write about the media they were experiencing. So this could be TV shows, movies from different cultures, and anything that they were learning from this. I wanted to emphasize the fact that we don't only learn through physical experiences, that you can learn about cultures through what you watch, what you see, and what you absorb through media. And so we would bring all this knowledge and we would discuss it, and students would find kind of similarities in their experiences despite them being very completely different circumstances. And that was where the learning and the building of cultural competency really happened. This period of kind of roundtable discussions were the most crucial, as it allows students to connect concepts we learned earlier in the course with the theories and the topics with their actual everyday encounters. And I will show you an example of that a little later on. So how did I try and enable cross-border understanding? The first thing was to allow competency to emerge as naturally as possible and not to lead them too much. As I said in the beginning, the class was very student-led. So whatever discussions came up, whatever topics came up, whatever questions came up is how we would veer the classroom. So each semester that I did this course was always a little bit different. Of course, I had a course syllabus, but the actual content was never fully engraved. So whatever with the new students that came up, we kind of veered into slightly different topics, from discussing issues of race and politics to talking about smaller things like how cultural clothing came about and all of these other topics. So each class was always very different. And this was the most important part for me, was to allow all of these competencies and all of these discussions to happen very, very naturally. Next was the focus was on self-reflection, so students' past experiences and actions, having objective views of their own culture, and enhancing their intercultural experiences in the future. So this was a kind of a three-step process. First, they could reflect on themselves, their past experiences. They could also have a more objective view of their own culture, thinking about pros, cons, good points, bad points, things they like, dislike, agree with, disagree with, and finally using all of these things to try and think about how can they enhance their intercultural competencies moving forward. If they were to experience the same situation, what would they do? So on and so forth. And finally, during this discussion, the students exhibited many of the skills that my MA research had encountered and elaborated on, and I will show a few examples of that also later on. So this is an excerpt from the video recording of one of our classroom roundtables. So this is one of the students talking, and here they're talking about an experience that they had when they were studying abroad. And for context, the student had arrived with two other students from the university to do a homestay in Northern America. And during this time, they arrived in the evening, so they were having dinner with their host mother and talking. And this is what they say. So the field work, I had homestay with two students from this university. I had so long dinner. It was more than 2 hours. 2 hours and we were finished eating. The host mother had thought that something happened when I chose. I need to say, can I go to bed? But I felt fear for my tomorrow. So this is intercultural experience, and this is politeness. I feel tired, and because I was tired, I need to eat sweets by host mother, even though I was tired. This experience tell me when I go to foreign country, I need to say what I want. So you can see, first of all, the students linked their experience, their past experience, to the theories and concepts we'd studied previously in the class, in this case being politeness theory. Not only this, they were able to reflect on this experience and think about what had happened and why had the situation happened the way it did. So the students had arrived in the evening and they'd had a very long dinner, 2-hour-long dinner, which is very unusual for a Japanese context. And so the students were tired, but they didn't know how to tell the host mother that they were tired and wanted to go to sleep. The student understood that there was the issue here was a difference in politeness. So the host mother was being polite in trying to engage them in conversation and trying to get them to feel comfortable in her home. And so she continued to talk to them, she continued to feed them, she provided sweets, etc., etc. Whereas for the Japanese student side, their politeness was to not say anything. So a negative politeness versus a positive politeness. And the student was able to reflect on this experience and understand that nobody in the situation was right or wrong. It was just a difference in culture, a difference in politeness. And not only that, they were able to reflect enough to think about what they would do in the future if they were in a similar situation. So the student says, when I go to foreign country, I need to say what I want to do. So they are aware that they need to vocalize what they want to do in order to be understood in a different cultural context. So here you can see exhibiting the self-awareness that we spoke about earlier, the objective view of own culture, understanding that neither is right or wrong, and lastly, being able to think about what they would do in the future. And further on in the conversation, the students together talk about thinking about the comparing of the culture. So V3, which is a separate student, asks voice 1, if this situation happened in Japan, what would you do? So if the student 1 was the host mother, what would they have done differently in this situation? The student goes on to say, I want to behave. I want to speak to foreigners, same as my host mother. But I wonder, I wonder if the foreigner says, what they want to do, like that. I say, you're tired, you can go to bed. So not only does the student think about the situation, what they would do if they were themselves in that situation. They also thought about it from the host's mother's perspective and how they would act differently. So we can see that the students are gaining enough cultural knowledge and enough competencies to make better decisions in intercultural situations for the future. And this is exactly what we wanted to see. So for moving forward, how do students enrich and enhance these experiences? So as the goal of this course was to enable students to attain cultural competency, we pooled all this knowledge in terms of the final project, as I've already mentioned. So they examined their past experiences and they used these experiences to enhance their future by being analytical, by using comparison, and just by using empathy to put themselves in the other culture's situation and being able to go back and forth between the two. So here's another example of one situation where students thought about how they would maintain an intercultural situation despite some difficulty. So in this discussion, I had told students about cultural issues with neighboring countries, which is obviously very common. And I told them example of French and British culture. And the student 2 responded with like Korea and Japan. And I said, yes, exactly. And I asked them to explain. And the student explained that Japan, so they said, there are lots of ups and downs, Korea and Japan relationship until now. So I just talked with Kim. Kim is his friend who is Korean. I just talked with Kim and it's okay, but we don't want to talk about World War because Japanese soldier had killed many people. So talking about World War for people is not good, essentially. And he also says we have similar cultures, Korea and Japan, like English and French, language, culture. And so you see the students learn from not only their own experiences, but other people in the classroom's experiences. And they're able to gain cultural knowledge from this and to move forward and think about how they can maintain other relationships. So this one is through a mission. So it's not always about talking about certain things, but the student knows that for certain touchy subjects like the World War, he doesn't talk to his friend about these things. He keeps it private and he keeps the conversation as civil as possible. So these are other techniques that students learned during the course. Yes, there would be many, many more, but unfortunately there's not enough time to go into them. But here, these are just some examples of how students were gaining these skills and gaining this knowledge to be able to become culturally competent individuals in a global world. So finally, how do we aid students as educators within the classroom? So I came up with a few ways, and I noticed the most important things were to keep the classrooms student focused, to keep them student centered, and to lead them in whichever ways came up naturally, and to keep the syllabus flexible. So having some form of structure, but allowing the content to emerge naturally. The second way was to explore diverse media. So this was in the classroom, we used videos, we used pictures, we used recordings, we used movies, we used TV shows from various different countries. And I also allowed students to bring their own media. And this was part of their homework every week. They would either watch a piece of media and they would bring it into the classroom to discuss. And this opened up whole new avenues of discussions, including race issues, including sexism, including many, many different cultural topics that can be quite taboo, but was a great way for students to explore and to learn and to kind of consider these topics a lot more deeply in terms of cultural context, etc. The third way was ensuring that the classroom was a safe space for students to share ideas and to share their feelings and to not feel judged and to be free to share those feelings and to be able to change their minds later on down the line. And lastly, for students to feel okay with challenging each other, challenging me, and challenging themselves to change their opinions and change their beliefs when an opportunity arose. So these are the ways that I was able to create those kinds of safe spaces within my classroom to allow for students to gain the cultural competency needed to hopefully go on into the world and become culturally competent individuals, to be able to handle intercultural experiences without feeling threatened or without feeling the us versus them mentality and all those kinds of problems that we are very aware of in an intercultural space currently. Yes. Thank you very much for coming to my talk, and I will field questions at this time. Thank you.